Ladies and gentlemen, the New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music presents James Tillman and Sergio Sayag performing Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come.
Just like the river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I just don't know what's beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know change is gonna come. Oh yeah. Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. But he winds up knocking me back down to my knees. There are times when I thought I wouldn't last for long, but now I know that I can carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come. Said it's been a long time coming, but I know a change is gonna come.
That was great. Thank you very much, James and Sergio. My name is David Van Zandt. I'm the president here at the New School, and I want to welcome you to tonight's event, Voices of Crisis, Reliving the American Race Crisis. This program is wonderful for the New School, and we feel like we've at least played a small part. The New School's mission is rooted in in innovation and challenging the status quo, as well as social engagement, creating solutions to pressing problems and issues of our time, and trying to enact positive social change. And we seek and we do attract students who have those traits and those interests, and I'm very proud of all of them. And I'm going to tell you a little story about this program, which suggests why we should be very proud of our students here. Tonight, though, is the first in a series of events that includes an exhibition on the American race crisis over at the Sheila Johnson Design Center, and we'll also have a reception there after the opening. And then later, we'll have 3 conversations at the New School, actually 2 here at the New School and 1 at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. Well, this entire project came through the collaboration of many people. At the New School, it was alumni and students, archivists, librarians, our New School for Jazz and Contemporary Music, our exhibitions program, along with our partner, the Schomburg Center at the New York Public Library. And it's a very interesting story about how this came about. A few years ago, one of our PhD students, Chris Cruz, came upon a photo of Dr. Martin Luther King speaking in this very auditorium. We hadn't known about it, about the photo at all. He then went to Carmen Hendershot, who is a longtime reference librarian at the New School, and she's led the search for information on the photograph, and she ultimately, which is even more fabulous, uncovered tapes of the speech that Dr. King made here in the lecture series called The Race Crisis, the American Race Crisis, along with a slew of documents around that. That was really quite a find. At that time, I'm talking about today, Lang student Miles Corman, who was the editor of the New School student paper, The Free Press, learned of the story. And the Free Press covered the discovery of the tapes, and then itself published these never before heard audio. In Miles' junior year, he then took a course on the New School's history and decided to make the American Race Crisis lecture series the subject of his honors thesis. He worked with Wendy Shire, the director of the Kellen Archives here at the New School, to plan an exhibition. And he also worked with Abigail Muir, a junior at Parsons, who joined the project as the exhibition designer. And if you go over to the Sheila Johnson Center later this evening, you will see all their work. And finally, Dominque Howse, who is an alum of the New School, came on board as a co-curator. At last year's commencement, where Miles graduated, Miles met Khalil Gibran Muhammad. Khalil was one of our honorary degree recipients last year, and Miles and Khalil began a conversation that resulted in this series. So I'm very proud of the role of the New School's role in hosting the original American Race Crisis lecture series. That again occurred right here in Tishman in this auditorium. But I'm also proud of our students and alumni and faculty and staff and partners today for bringing this important part of our legacy forward. So now it's my pleasure to welcome our two distinguished guests. First is C.T. Vivian, a distinguished minister and author and organizer. As a leader of the civil rights movement and a friend of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he participated in freedom rides and sit-ins across the U.S. He founded several civil rights organizations in his own right, and most notably in 2008, he founded the C.T. Vivian Leadership Institute to train new generations of leaders for grassroots initiatives. He currently serves as Dean of the Urban Institute at the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta. And we are very proud to say that in 1984, he was the recipient of an honorary degree from the New School. And hopefully that ranks right up there with his other major honor, which was in 2013, President Barack Obama named him a recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom. We applaud his commitments to challenging the status quo and creating positive change. He really is a role model for our students here at the New School, our students who want to make a difference in their communities, in the country, and in the world. And then second is Khalil Gibran Muhammad, who is currently the director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture at the New York Public Library. Khalil's scholarship focuses on the link between race and crime. He is the author of The Condemnation of Blackness, Race, Crime, and the Making of Modern Urban America, which was recently published by the Harvard University Press. And he's currently working on his second book, Disappearing Acts, The End of White Criminality in the Age of Jim Crow. He is on the editorial board of Transition magazine, published by the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute at Harvard. He himself is the great-grandson of Elijah Muhammad and also the son of Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times photographer Ozier Muhammad. Khalil, as I mentioned, received an honorary degree here from the New School in 2013, last year. So again, I'm going to ask them both to come out, and thank you very much for being with us this evening, and I'm going to turn it over to them for our program.
Thank you very much, President Van Zandt. I can't say that I am completely unbiased in having this opportunity to be part of the event, to celebrate the amazing history of this institution through the work that it's done, and that the two of us are honorary degree recipients. Now I know that there's always a master plan at work, so it's terrific to be here. Thank you very much for welcoming us to the New School. There are a few other people I want to thank. They've played a part in tonight happening before we hear from a living legend. So I want to thank Wendy Shear. She's the archivist. We are doing the same work, and it's a real delight to see the work of the archives reaching beyond the research community and being a source of engagement and enrichment. It's certainly what we do at the Schomburg, so it's a pleasure to be able to share in this work. Oftentimes the work of the archivist goes unnoticed. I also want to thank the technical crew who are part of tonight's program, Ryan Blum, as well as Mary Doctor. And I want to thank those fabulous musicians, the young people who are students here, who are continuing the musical heritage of the civil rights movement. So please, for Sergio and James, give it up again. And lastly, I want to thank the Schomburg staff. Clarisse, Rosaz, Shariyf, who is with us here tonight, worked very closely with Miles and Dominque Howse, who are, as President Van Zandt has already described, have really worked hard to make all of this happen. And they worked very closely with Clarisse and Ladi'Sasha Jones. So that's the long list of credits of people who helped make this evening possible. But I think the time is really about Mr. Vivian, about the work that he's done. Having him here is truly a delight and a pleasure, although I'm not sure if being in Atlanta in the midst of an ice storm or being in New York on the eve of a blizzard is a fair trade. I'm not sure how that works. But nevertheless, we're grateful for his commitment to being here in spite of the bad weather forecast. He's also here with Don. I want to thank Don Rivers, who assists him and has been a major part of the work that he's done for the last 4 decades. So it's a lot of credits, but I think given how special this evening is and how special our guest is, it's important to just acknowledge him. One more big round of applause. So the frame of tonight's discussion will be to have someone to really contextualize the movement as it was unfolding in real time, which is really precisely the context for the American race crisis. The very idea of it was that something transformative was happening in real time. And what better way to both understand it, to come to grips with its implications, and perhaps to do something about it than to bring those people here to the New School. Someone asked me, in light of this event, whether I thought this was unusual or exceptional. And I must say, in my years of teaching in the academy, which isn't that long, but between graduate school and being a professor, it's been almost 20 years. And I can say that I have not heard of such a thing where, you get one world leader comes and gives a big talk. You get a couple of grassroots activists in the midst of, say, the Occupy movement may show up on a campus here or there. But to draw upon a group of people who were in various capacities, from the head of the NAACP to the head of CORE, to Dr. King, to John Killian, who was the head of the Harlem Writers Guild, people in culture, in politics, in administration. That's really saying something, and we owe a debt to Daniel Anthony, who was the genius behind this, and you'll learn more about him when you head to the exhibition. Okay, so that's the scene. So we're going to learn a lot more about Dr. King and Reverend Vivian in real time. So let's get to know our guest a little bit better. So we're going to run a clip, and then we're going to talk about this amazing life. So let's cue the clip, please.
The Teachers' March was the first black middle-class demonstration in Selma. Cheyenne Webb and Rachel West were school children at the time.
And it was amazing to see how many teachers had participated. I remember vividly on that day when I saw my teachers marching with me, you know, just for the right to vote.
And it was, teachers then was somewhat like up in the upper class, you know. People look up to teachers then and look up to preachers. They were somewhat like leaders for us back then.
Then the undertakers got a group and they marched. The beauticians got a group, they marched. Everybody marched after teachers marched because teachers had more influence than they ever dreamed in the community.
And we want you to know, gentlemen, that every one of you, see, we know your badge numbers, we know your names.
In mid-February, Reverend C.T. Vivian, an SCLC organizer, confronted Sheriff Clark and his deputies on the courthouse steps.
But believe me, there were those that followed Hitler, like you blindly follow this Sheriff Clark, who didn't think their day would come. But they also were pulled into courtrooms, and they were also given their death sentences. You're not this bad a racist, but you're racist in the same way that Hitler was a racist. And you're blindly following a man that's leading you down a road that's going to bring you into federal court. Now, I am representing people in Dallas County, and I have that right to do so. Now, and as I represent them, and they can speak for themselves, is what I'm saying true? Yes. Is it what you think and what you believe? Yes. For this is not a local problem, gentlemen. This is a national problem. You can't keep anyone in the United States from voting without hurting the rights of all other citizens. Democracy is built on this. This is why every man has the right to vote, regardless.
And he started shouting at me that I was a Hitler, I was a brute, that I was a Nazi. I don't remember everything he called me. And I did lose my temper then.
And we have come to be here because they are registering at this time.
And so we have come, and we have come to I can't enforce the law with a light, my face.
We have come to register. And this is our reason for being here. We're not
You're blinding me with that light.
We're not,
move back.
Well, no, you can arrest us. Don't keep that man. Don't keep that man. You want to arrest us? You don't have to beat us. No, you don't have to beat us.
I don't remember even hitting him, but I went to the doctor and got an x-ray and found out I had a linear fracture and a finger on my left hand.
With Jim Clark, it was a clear engagement between the forces of movement and the forces of the structure that would destroy movement. It was a clear engagement between those who wished the fullness of their personalities to be met and those that would destroy us physically and psychologically. You do not walk away from that. This is what movement meant. Movement meant that finally we were encountering on a mass scale the evil that had been destroying us on a mass scale. You do not walk away from that. You continue to answer it.
If we're wrong, why don't you arrest us?
Why don't you get out in front of the camera and go on?
It's not a matter of being in front of the camera. It's a matter of facing your sheriff and facing your judge. We're willing to be beaten for democracy. And you misuse democracy in the street. You beat people bloody in order that they will not have the privilege to vote. You beat me in the side and then hide your blows. I don't need to leave. We have come to register to vote. Hey, everybody in the rest! Let's all go! You want to arrest me?
I'm here to tell you tonight that the businessmen, the mayor of this city, the police commissioner of this city, and everybody in the white power structure of this city must take a responsibility for everything that Jim Clark does in this community.
To force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negro race into our theaters, into our swimming pools, into our...
Strom Thurmond's 1948 presidential run on a segregationist platform was unsuccessful. But it wasn't until 1971 that the Supreme Court finally outlawed segregated pools and beaches, 17 years after the integration of American schools. The effort to integrate beaches and pools intensified here in 1964 in the former slave trading port of St. Augustine, Florida, when a civil rights leader literally drew a new line in the sand and asked former state attorney Dan Warren for the protection of the law.
He was wearing a bathing suit. He said, well, I want to go swimming. And I said, well, be my guest. You're properly attired. And he said, well, you don't understand, Mr. Warren. Every time we want to go swimming at the public beach, the Klan interferes with us and they beat us up.
Lunch counter sit-ins turned into beach wade-ins, and a special force of state troopers was sent in to keep segregationists from pummeling the protesters.
They formed two lines, waded out in the ocean in full uniform. Demonstrators came in. Well, the Klan was waiting, and they had pickup trucks parked on the beach, and in the trunks and in the beds, the trucks had surveyor stakes. And they'd grab the surveyor stakes and try to break through that line.
What did swimming represent to segregationists that created such hostility?
Fear.
Of what?
Fear against going and sharing the same water with blacks.
44% of black children live under the poverty level right now. All right? 36% of black families live under the poverty level, and that's the highest it's ever been since they've been keeping figures on us. Now, let's say it this way. Let's say it is too much and you drop out, or pushed out is what we call it, being pushed out. Then 30% of a white dropouts are unemployed, but 71.4% of black dropouts are unemployed. If you're a black male, the study said that we may see a generation of young black men who've never had a steady job. Even if you get to college, a black man with a college education will make slightly less in a lifetime than a white man with a high school education.
But let me stop you, Dr. Vivian, because I know that there are a number of people listening to this show, and no doubt those of you in the seminar who say, well, that is not my fault, and the opportunities have been given, and so we need to discuss why those statistics are the way they are.
Yeah, and let's deal with that as the principle.
Okay.
What America doesn't deal with, and if you got in half of our confrontations there, is that what white America doesn't deal with when it comes to blacks is cause and effect. Yeah. They say blacks are like this, but they never deal with why we're like that, right? That's why I turn and say, are blacks treated the same in the society? And of course, every white person, no, we're not. But what they don't realize, Oprah, is what that actually does, the depth of it, is that their mistreatment, their choosing not to accept blacks, creates a depth of suffering and death. In fact, there is nothing in this society.
It starts a chain that never gets broken.
In fact, chain is the good word because it's a cycle. Everything works on everything else. In fact, racism destroys more people psychologically and physically than any other factor in American society.
Strong words. So that clip opens with you being a very forceful agitator, to use some of the language of the period, and closes with you making a very forceful claim. Where did all this forceful energy come from?
Is it being black in America?
Microphone. Mike, to your mouth. Yes.
Where did it come from?
Yes.
Being black in America. If you're not upset by how you're treated in America, you are sicker than white people think. All right? It's just that simple. If they think that you just walk around smiling and, and loving it, and isn't it wonderful to be in America? And aren't you thankful to be with all these good white people?
So that's a lot. I'm not sure whether it's 64 or 2014. Let's talk a little bit about your childhood. So you're born in 1924. So just in case you didn't realize how he has miracle genes. Let's talk about that. So because obviously this is a time period, and you're in Peoria, Illinois, which is southern Illinois, southwestern Illinois.
Yeah.
You might as well be close enough to the Mason-Dixon line in parts of Illinois at that time.
Yeah.
What was the setting of your childhood?
Yeah, in fact, really to do it justice here, you have to see that I was really born in Missouri, all right? One of the reasons we're close to that line is because the Depression set in just at the time that I would be going to first grade. And it was just at the time that the Depression wiped out the money and goods and farms and stuff that people had saved up. We had two series like that when you look at black history, really, right? Is that, and this is the third one, really, right? Is that, terrible things happen in depressions, and whatever color you are, all right, you're worse off if you're black, and you're worse treated. Further back you go, right? So we lost everything in the first year of the official depression.
And was the family in agriculture or small business?
That's it. We owned 3 farms, lost all 3 of them, right? And as a result of that, because the banks closed on it. The banks simply closed, right? I mean, period. There wasn't any order to it. They just closed. You could not get anything out of them. But what it did was to break the heart of men. They could not take it because work was what they were, workers, right? They were proud of the fact that they had produced 3 farms. They helped build Lincoln University, right? In Missouri, not Pennsylvania. Yeah, not Pennsylvania. And but everything they was proud of was destroyed. I mean, immediately.
So the family relocates to
divorce.
Peoria.
No,
parents
divorce first. All right, because it just couldn't take it. And then the 2 women decided, hey, we only got one good thing left, and
this is your mother and grandmother.
It is both of them, actually. Yeah. But my grandmother was basically the leader, right? And so they took off for and a house burned down in town. We had a house in town too as well, and it burned down, right? It was a fellow burned it down, right? And
in retribution for something?
No, yes. Well, I shouldn't have even brought that in.
Okay.
But
all right. So,
but since
some business is left unsaid.
It brings out some of that stuff, though. Is that my grandmother was such a loving person, and then you had common law, right? So you were married, but the man could put you out within a year or so if he wanted to. Well, he did. He just put his wife out. She was such a nice woman that my grandmother wouldn't allow it and told her, come in my house. He was so angry about it, he burned our house down, right? Now, I shouldn't have brought that in, as I said, right? It had nothing to do with your, that's a private, personal matter. All right. So we moved to Missouri, and not too far across the line. We stopped at a little town named Macomb, Illinois. Where we stopped there, because they planned it well, is that there was a university in the town.
Western
right?
Illinois University.
Western Illinois. And they knew that no matter what happened, because you could not tell what was going to happen, is that I would get to go through college, right? And that was the idea.
And how old were you when this move happened?
I was 6.
6 years old.
We got there just in time for me to enter into the second semester of first grade, right? And that's exactly the saving grace of it all, right? But we were in the heart of the Depression, right? And we got a home there because a fellow fell in love with my grandmother, and she said, "Not without my daughter and my grandson."
Exactly.
I'm feeling good tonight. So
that's right. That's right.
You will hear all this personal stuff that has nothing to do with nothing,
so
right?
Let me help us along a little bit.
Okay, yeah.
So it's obvious that that you didn't take after your grandmother when it came to the feistiness.
Oh no!
And what
you don't know my grandmother.
Oh, so see, okay. So that's what because part of your story, the part of the story that I'm aware of is that you did a lot of fighting, a lot of brawling as a kid.
Oh yeah. In fact, see, depression has here again, right? At Lincoln grade school, we fought every day.
And everybody was upset, right?
Yeah, because you see, the home was disturbed. The children were disturbed. See, it's a terrible thing. You're growing up in this. You see what I mean? I started smoking at 6 years old. I was no sooner at the school. You understand? Do you get the idea? Is that I quit in time, however, I want you to know. It was all of that kind of thing, right? Is that what saved me was the fact I won the first fight I was in, right? That's what saved me. Theodore Derrick, never will forget.
Oh, gosh. Wow. That is impressive.
Keep going. We got it.
George Foreman had a line of grills several years ago. He needs a line of vitamins, because if he could remember that guy's name, that's impressive. So you tell this story about someone hurling a racial slur at you at some point, either in grade school or at high school. Yeah. And you challenged him to a fight in the lumber yard.
Across the street.
There's a moment where you realize that he's not going to fight you.
Yeah.
And that changes your sense of violence, your personal sense of violence.
That was my introduction to nonviolence. And I didn't understand it, and there was no word around for nonviolence at the time. But I knew that I could not hit him. I could push him, and I could talk about him. I could, curse him out. I could do everything to him, but hit him, right? And I was trying to make him hit me, but he would not. Now, later, as I thought about it, right then, later as I thought about it within days and weeks and months, is that there was something about that, because it kept troubling me that I could not hit him, I hear other people fought all the time, right? And we're just kids, but we fought all the time. But I could not get him out of my mind. And why was it I could not hit him? It's because he did not understand what was going on. He didn't know that this colored Valentine enraged me. He had no understanding, and I couldn't hit him because he didn't understand, right? And I began to realize that something was deeper there than I thought, right? And so that, and finally, by the time I was out of 6th grade, I was the leader of the school because, you know, I could fight better than everybody, right? So I got all the kids together and all the guys together and set them on the fire escape, right? And said, look, we're not going to fight once we leave here and go to Edison Junior High. We're not going to fight, 624 system. And they all agreed. But I'd been working on it for 2 years, right? And the
all right, so I'm gonna cut you off right there.
Okay. Right. But that's it. Is that stuff is deep in you. How do you get it out? How do you learn it? And
we're gonna connect that to some of the bigger issues.
Okay, good enough. I can tell right now you're the guy to do it too.
So you have a favorite childhood book, a book written by William Wells Brown, who was a famous abolitionist and writer, a propagandist on behalf of anti-slavery cause. Wrote a book in 1863 called The Black Man, His Antecedents, His Genius, His Achievements.
That's right.
What did that book mean to you while you were kicking butt all over town? Because you say this was the most important book that you were exposed to as a child.
Is that I was marble champion too, and I used to practice all winter behind the stove underneath my grandmother's bookcase, and so I would put the marbles down there and board it off so I could shoot, right? Well, I was collecting the marbles, and I pulled myself up, and there was this book, and I wondered what it was about. So I pulled it off the shelf, and when and I was standing in the room, just looking at it, going page, a couple page here and a couple page there, and then my grandmother stopped and looked over my shoulder, and she said, "Oh, those are race men." I didn't say a thing, but I still remember it. But more than that, I remember the depth of it. I understood what she really was talking about. You get my point? And I grew up in a house with a great deal of pride in themselves and in black people, right? I knew what it meant. Now, that was basic. There are such small things but are so basic, right, to the rest of your life. And that was one with me. By the way, on the books things, I found I have a first edition of 12 Years a Slave.
Grandma had a great collection.
1843, yeah.
So this book, the reason I brought this up is because I'm curious about your historical consciousness, and so how you began to think about the work that you're doing in the movement as you began to chart a course. Just to say a word about this book, there are 57 entries of 19th century African-American leaders. It's a veritable who's who of the change makers of the antebellum period, because we've not gotten to the end of the Civil War when this book is published. So there's an entry on Phyllis Wheatley, there's an interest on entry on Frederick Douglass, who goes on to live 32 more years. So, you know, in this kind of real-time way, it's chronicling the voices of African-American leadership in that time period who are making a difference. There's this great line in the book about a guy named Robert Smalls who stole a Confederate vessel, essentially, and delivered it to the Union Army in South Carolina at the start of the Civil War. And the opening line to the section on Robert Smalls is, "Boys, this is the dawn of freedom for our race," which is a direct quote from Robert Smalls. Now, I'd have to check the footnotes on the transcript of that moment. This is probably from Robert Smalls remembering back as to what he said. But that kind of heroic voice could make a very strong impression on a kid who, particularly for coming of age in the Depression era, needed a kind of imaginative world of heroes.
Precisely.
So when you arrive, so you're educated at Western Illinois. You arrive in Nashville in what year?
Oh, I don't remember years. My wife always kept those for me.
Okay, that's okay. That's all right. We have a pretty good estimate. So you helped to found the Nashville Christian Leadership Movement, which is connected to Jim Lawson.
Yeah.
So the reason I want to start here in terms of the movement itself is because we know John Lewis's story perhaps a little bit better, the congressman who was sort of the youngest member of SNCC and is an iconic person in all of the images of being turned away from the courthouse wearing his trench coat and backpack. And he talks about growing up in Troy, Alabama, where essentially he is writing to Dr. King after reading a comic book published by the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Now, because you are his senior by essentially a generation, you're already there waiting, essentially, for a John Lewis to arrive on the scene. So talk about the infrastructure that you and Jim Lawson put in place that only needed these students and these young people who would literally take the ball and run with it. Tell us about that story, because we know more about John Lewis and Diane Nash. We don't know about the soil that is tilled in that place before they arrive.
Is that that's very important, or the lives of people that were involved, right? The reason for being at seminary in the first place was
American Baptist College in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah, well, it was a seminary at first. Then it became in the middle of it. I got caught in the middle of it with this college, with this thing, right? But the thing is that when I think of it, I want you to see, that everybody has to understand that the reason for ministry in our mind, right? And I went to an AME church, you're familiar. And the idea coming out of all of that was to save black people. We're not talking about to save them so they can use wings in heaven somewhere. Right? We're talking about to save them from the hell that they were in here. All right? And all of that was a part of the lifestyle, and our pastors were so important. And my pastor in Macomb, Illinois, was a good deal of all that made that meaningful, right? But until I was called, I was not going.
Okay. So for you, a sort of social gospel, and I'm assuming that was the language of the time.
It was, in fact. Those were the first books I read that let me understand anything about the real theology of the struggle.
So Dr. King, who shows up as a young 25-year-old pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, a few years after you arrive in Nashville, but before John Lewis makes his way to Nashville. It's the reason why John Lewis is writing from Troy to Montgomery, because he's heard about the bus cart. He's read about it in his comic book, which was released in 1958 by the Fellowship of Reconciliation. What I'm trying to sort of put on the table is, you describe these influential pastors, but Dr. King says, as he sort of tells his own story about coming to the social gospel, that he's reacting against the passivity of the black church. It's going along with segregation, and indeed offers up his father, who is the pastor of Ebenezer in Atlanta, Georgia, as a kind of exhibit of a very comfortable black pastor leading a congregation in the midst of a literal social crisis.
Yeah, is that, let's talk about that. Is that, let's talk about that. Is that he went to Morehouse, the father. Right? He met his wife there, who was Mama King, as we said, right? Whose father basically owned the church, right? And a stained glass window sets up on one side and sets up on the other side. Grandfather of Martin King on that side, his father on this side. Mama King was killed at the, playing the piano, all right? What I want you to see is that he was one of the most active people in community creating things for black people, all right? You have to ask yourself.
Daddy King was.
Yeah, Daddy King was, right? You have to, her father before she'd married him, right? You have to see how much can you get done under the circumstances under which you're forced to live. And that bank that he helped found, everything that he helped do, right, was a part of making a community which was able to fight back. There wasn't even a high school in that town until those ministers created one. You understand my point? Is that now it would seem like they're doing all right. They're doing all right, but they're making things much better for the total community. And there was no one else to do it but ministers. And also remember this, is that nobody wanted somebody as bad off as they are. They wanted somebody to look up to and their children to look up to, right? And this is why that ministers always wore suits and ties and so forth, right? Because their congregations weren't. They gave it to you.
So I think what you're complicating the juxtaposition between men of the pulpit who may not have had a political critique of their communities, but were creating the basis of the community so that it could be sustained in a way.
Precisely. And that has to be understood because the rest of it couldn't have happened. See, Granddaddy was not known as an activist. Daddy was, right? But as an activist to help create community. See, and then the third generation, get that now, right? Because it's terribly important, right? Is that you don't immediately come out of slavery into greatness or goodness, because the whole society won't let you, right? But a 3-generation buildup it takes to basically do it. You see what I mean? Is that that must be understood, and it shows. And you have to be surrounded by more than you and somebody you know. You get my point? Now, given all of that, those were steps toward coming out of. Remember, Martin King's education was basic to the future of everybody in this room, right? If he hadn't had a doctorate in
theology.
Yeah, I was going to say that, but I was going to add the others, but just leave it at theology. But you see, the point being is that he spent his time thinking through what's the strategy that can break through and allow us to be free. If he had not thought it through, we would never be free. It wasn't just Martin, it was the strategy of Martin King. It wasn't just the education, it was the strategy of Martin King. It was nonviolent direct action completely understood, right? You see, until he could lead it. When the moment came, he was ready. Nobody else was.
So take us into SCLC behind the scenes, right? Because again, we either rely on historians, we rely on FBI transcripts, which are pretty reliable, or we rely on firsthand witnesses. And so what does that look like in terms of his particular leadership? He's clearly on the younger end of the ministerial community, of which became the bedrock of SCLC. So how is he respected? Does he have to earn respect long before we get to the national iconic figure?
Okay, he had learned to have respect because he came out of school with stuff that made the people say, he is a leader, he is our man. So when the action started, the people wanted him, right? And look, he was the youngest guy among us all, but he was the natural leader of all of us. You understand what I'm saying? It was at the kind of situation where how old you were, even though we live in a culture, and we particularly lived in the culture that age was important, right? It wasn't more important than freeing black people, all right? People had waited for some strategy to change us. See what I mean? And nobody had come up with a strategy for freedom. That was the important thing, right? Is that and he had it, understood it, was writing articles that even got in the local Atlanta paper when he was right out of high school. Right.
Now he was though a little bit of a late convert to nonviolence, right? Because you've got Bayard Rustin who shows up and tells him, you can't carry a gun, Martin, in Montgomery, Alabama. This is. I know you might be afraid because there is violence all around, but that's not going to work.
That's right. See, the point being is Bayard Rustin was already into nonviolence, right?
And so were you, which is the point I'm trying to.
That's right. 12 is that I had my first nonviolent direct action in 12 years before Montgomery, all right? Now, the point being is I saw it work, and remember, it goes back to that fourth grade thing, right? Give me a point. I saw it work, and I felt it work, right? I knew that it would work, and we opened Peoria, Illinois, right? Second largest city in the state at that time, of Illinois at that time, right? We opened it up, caused the mayor to come to terms with us so that he had to come to terms with the community. And so I already knew it would work. The point being is that how good are you? We worked it in Peoria and then didn't know what to do with it after we made it work, right? Where Martin made it work in Montgomery and kept pushing that stone up the hill for the next 20 years, right? 15 years, really. Now, when you consider that, that's what it's all about. And nobody cares what your age is if you can free them.
I have a selfish moment I want to take here on behalf of the Schomburg Center. And we've been able to spend a little bit of time together this evening, and I deliberately did mention this because I wanted your response to be as spontaneous as possible. So, does the name Dr. Lawrence Reddick ring a bell?
Yeah, in fact, he was the first one to do a book on Martin.
On Martin.
And my wife thought he was the greatest thing, and she started creating a library around Martin on that, and did the first book on Coretta. But the point is, you're going somewhere else with that too.
Well, actually, no. You've set me up pretty good here. So your response is exactly what I wanted.
Okay.
So Dr. Lawrence Reddick is the successor to Arturo Schomburg, the original collector and curator of the Schomburg collection. He's teaching at City College in the 1940s, and he's recruited to run the Schomburg Center. And he's actually there from 1938, after Schomburg passes, until 1948, where he eventually goes to Atlanta. He's friends with the King family, and he's a part of SCLC, right? He's on the board.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. So I just think that's pretty awesome Schomburg history, that a former curator is essentially helping to guide the movement.
Yeah, and I tell you something else about Schomburg, is that there was a group of guys in this town that used to hang around a bookstore, and they knew everything about black people and nobody else did. And they really did. And they were collectors, great collectors. Yeah. See, I'm a book collector, so I like all this. You led me right down the right track. Right? But the point is that those collectors, all right, knew more about who we were. When we finally came to the point of facing the identity crisis, which was ultimately necessary for everything else we did, right, is that they had set the stage for our liking ourselves, all right? Because remember, if there hadn't been some people that liked being black, we never would have come to the point that we were willing to fight for being black. All right? And places like the Schomburg was it. I tell you what, I tried to collect black books when I was ending high school, all right? But you see, you couldn't, because there was no place for you to find out, right? There was no place for you to find out. And most of us in black America had no place to find out who we were.
Right. And in fact, it's a consequence of the assassination of Dr. King that almost every college and university outside of the historically black colleges and universities committed themselves to establishing black studies departments or building library collections so that students who were demanding these things could learn something about their own history.
Precisely. And this was basic to the movement. See what I mean? You can't cause people to fight nonviolently for themselves if they don't like themselves, right? See, this is basic, and we all got to see in this room that struggle coming up out of black people saved white America as well as black America. The first people that were saved by it were white Southerners, because we love folk. That's where nonviolence comes in. See what I mean? And remember, those who made the movement were coming out of churches walking down the street. Right? See, is that the guys on the corner talking about, I wouldn't do this and I wouldn't do that and I wouldn't take this and I wouldn't take that, weren't doing it. They weren't doing anything. You see what I mean? See, and the point is those who were willing to die for the change were the ones that counted, not the ones willing to so-called fight for it, meaning the only time they were going to jump up and down and do anything was if somebody hit them, right?
Speaking about the willingness to act and a sense of self, one of Dr. King's lesser known statements comes in a passage in his 1967 book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. And he talks about the importance of historical consciousness or historical literacy. He says, the history books, which have completely left out the contributions of the Negro, go a long way to explaining the Negro's sense of worthlessness and the anachronistic doctrine of white supremacy. I think it's a really powerful quote which really draws our attention to exactly what you're saying, is how important that sense of racial identity was to fortifying this sense of purpose and drive that was necessary to muster the courage.
Still is.
Still is. So we're going to have a quick clip, and we're going to talk some more about you and Dr. King and the work. So this is an opportunity to hear the never before in 50 years response of Dr. King to a series of questions by a moderator here at the New School in the midst of the actual lecture happening on February 6th. So we're just literally 50 years almost to the date to that. So first clip, please, and we have an accompanying slide of the actual quote, so you get to read along a little bit of it.
Civil rights activities since the March on Washington, in which you so eloquently spoke.
Here again, I think you have some inevitables to contend with and to recognize. I don't think anyone should interpret what appears to be a lull as a slowing up on the part of the Negro in his quest for freedom and justice. I think several things explain this. One is a very human thing, that after a whole season of demonstrations, you just get a little tired and you need to get some rest. I say this jokingly, but this is serious. I don't know any movement that we've had that didn't have a period when you reached the height of that movement and you had a sort of temporary pause. After the sit-in movement in 1960, there was this period, but it didn't mean stopping. For the next year, the Freedom Rides came. After the Freedom Rides, we had a few months when things held up a bit, but that didn't mean stopping. We had the Albany movement in 1962. After the Albany movement, things slowed up a bit for a little while, but then came the Birmingham movement in 1963. Now, I think that we are facing now the inevitable lull that develops in a movement when you recognize a need for pausing to assess and reassess, for retrospect, to have introspection and to look at the movement and put yourself in a better position to make greater leaps in the future. I think this is what we faced right after the March on Washington, and I don't think at any point this represented slowing up. For you can see that the movement is now gaining new momentum, and I'm sure that the progress made in '63 only whetted the appetite of the Negro for greater progress in 1964. And I think we will see more intensified activity in the civil rights movement, and that the movement will gain even greater momentum in 1964.
What's really striking about that, Dr. Vivian, is how conscious you all are of every step along the way. And if you can set the scene for this moment, because here we are, we're February 6, 1964. So looking back, it's easy to say, well, of course the Civil Rights Act was going to be passed, but it wasn't. And the question itself comes from a place that is really calling into question whether the activists themselves were committed to seeing this through. So in some ways, King is answering a question that is putting the movement on the defensive.
Right now. Yes. See, the point being is that people come to the point when they think they have won. I don't care how good a leader you are, you can't lead if people don't follow. Is that we came to the point we thought we had gained our freedom, quote unquote. Yeah? See, when half a dozen laws were passed, and they all were freedom. They really pretended freedom. They had very meaning for it, right? Is that and that has to be seen as very, very important. Now, but the people, see, we keep talking about leadership, right? But the point is, leaders can talk to people about freedom. But as long as people think they've got it, then it doesn't matter what the so-called leader thinks. You see what I mean? Is that this is terribly important. But what we've got to all make clear on is that we created the greatest drama of the last century, right? And we can do it again if we want to.
Sure.
See, but we've got to want to. And you can't think you already got it. You've got to know that you have not got where you want to be yet. Because anybody will settle if they think they've got what they want, right? And they have to clearly see that we are still the great movement of our time. Mm-hmm. The pauses, as Martin says, is going to be long, right? But he didn't expect it to be this long. You see? And
so that's between the March on Washington, right, which is a huge high water mark at the end of August.
That was high water mark.
And all of a sudden now we're into February and nothing's happening. 50
years later.
Well, I meant, well, okay. We're on two different times. See, this man, he's ready to march now.
And this becomes tremendously important because we've really looked at that 50-year mark, all right, and had another 50. Oh, we're ready and all that, but nothing happened when we left there, right? Is that so? We really have to ask, what needs to be done, and are we ready to do it? And when I say we, I mean all of us, black, white, yellow, pink, and polka dot, that really believe in freedom.
So see, I want to take that moment, since we're in the present, and I want to bring Dr. King back into it from this occasion, because he engages in a conversation with the moderator about preferential treatment. And since we've just seen a decision from the Supreme Court in Abigail versus Fisher, is that right? What's her name? Abigail Fisher. Fisher versus Texas. About essentially calling into question the necessity for an ongoing commitment to affirmative action in higher education. So this is a fascinating contemporary resonance of a question that Dr. King answers here at the New School, which I think is also telling about the discomfort in 1964 about the kind of retributive work that was necessary to address the legacy and the ongoing struggle of inequality. So our second clip, and then we're going to move to our conclusion and a Q&A.
And I think this is one which is on the minds of all of you. Dr. King, do you think preferential treatment of the Negro is a solution in any way to the race problem?
That requires a long answer, really, because I do think we're battling at points with the problem of semantics here, and I do think it needs to be interpreted in a very real sense. It is one of the areas where we have a great deal of misunderstanding. So it is a matter of interpretation. Let me say first that the Negro has been inflicted with 244 years of slavery and 100 years of segregation. And so with the legacy of these two unjust systems facing him, it is only natural that he is way behind. And he has been out of the mainstream of American life. He has been on the periphery of American life for all of these years. And it would really be a miracle that history hadn't seen for someone to start exactly 344 years behind in a race and get ahead or catch up, rather, unless something special is done. We've had special treatment in the negative sense for 344 years. Now we've got to get a little special treatment in the positive sense in order to catch up and improve these lagging standards. Now one immediately raises the question, isn't this discrimination in reverse? I don't know, but I know society does this over and over again. It is a part of the social consciousness of our great democracy, I think. We have many things that we do. If we deprive somebody of something, we do give something special to make up for that deprivation. If we take a man away from school and his family and send him off to the army, if he makes it back, we do have special things that we do. We deprive him of something, so we make it possible for him to get veterans loans. He can build a house with certain stipulations that I can't get because I'm not a veteran. He can start a business with certain help that others can't get. If he wants to go to college, he has help from the government with the GI Bill of Rights. This is nothing new. It happens, and we see subsidies in many areas, and unemployment compensation. This is nothing new. You compensate those who have been deprived of something. And certainly the Negro has faced a great deprivation, and I'm convinced that America must do something to grapple with this problem. I'd like to mention an experience I had in India not long ago. I was talking with...
Thank you. Wow. So, quick sidebar, former president of New School, Ira Katznelson, right? He was former president. Yes. And so he wrote a book, I don't know, about 8 years ago called When Affirmative Action Was White. And the book is a history of the very social policies that Dr. King describes here, starting with the New Deal and the social welfare benefits that were empowering workers in America as a result of the crash of capitalism, going into veterans benefits and the GI Bill. And this is essentially the kind of history in the academic setting that helps to educate newer generations. But Dr. King speaks to this in a way that one would suggest that the discourse around white privilege in that time was in its infancy at best. I mean, so it suggests to me that you all are thinking strategically about how do you defend what you see is absolutely necessary. So this is not my suspicion, and really this is the question, is Dr. King didn't just come up with this on the spot, right? You guys are thinking about how do we go to these northern audiences where people are all for ending Jim Crow in the South, but what we do from there is the big question. Tell us about this issue of Dr. King having to defend the compensatory phase of the movement.
See, in fact, it was just like you say. I mean, just that we had to place it in front of white America to make them realize that at every step they've had white privilege, and that they built privilege upon privilege upon privilege, right? And they had it. We got, at no point did we get it, right? is that, and they interpret differently. They interpret that they gave us something. And the way they say it is, we really didn't deserve it. They just were nice to us, right? Well, nobody has ever given us anything in America. That's got to be seen. And it's hard for white people to see it. They think they gave it to us. We've worked harder for less than anybody in this culture, all right? Because there was always white privilege, right? There never was privilege for black folk, right?
Even in poverty, I mean, one expression of white privilege would be just to be left alone.
In fact, that's a point. Now, see, this becomes tremendously important for us to look ahead right now, all right? Is that how do we get to the next step? See, this has been a depression too, all right? Is that, and remember, what is that we've always suffered more in any situation than white America generally, all right? Is that, so that we come out of this one having lost more, right? Than
in terms of housing,
any other group.
Of employment.
Right. In fact, we were just beginning to come to the point that we could have a house, right? At the end of World War II, I remember when the first set of houses were made for black folk. It was just one house at a time before, if you were fortunate, right? As World War II ended, then there was houses for black people, and they were new houses, right? And you paid basically the same for them. That had never happened before. All right, we always paid more for everything, making less and paying more.
Yeah.
All right. Now, how do you overcome that? And how do you make your nation that claims to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, brave enough to let other people be free?
Yeah.
All right?
That's powerful. I'm going to close with reading a quote from you from just a few months ago on November 20th when you received the prestigious Medal of Freedom, and give you a chance to send us away. Now, I know we're at the end of what would be the Q&A, although we started about 15 minutes late. So question to the team, we're at the last phase. I'm going to give this quote. He's going to respond. Do we have time to open the Q&A, or will we have to? I cannot see. Yes, great. Okay. So here's the quote, and I want you to use it as an invitation to talk about the C.T. Vivian Leadership Institute and talk about the work that you're doing right now. So your quote is saying, "There wasn't an institution in America that wasn't changed by what we did. But the victory isn't completely won yet. We still have to save America. Black people have to save America. It can't save itself. 400 years of slavery has proven that."
That's right. That's the point. Is that 400 years of slavery is when I say save America, I mean, we say we are, we have great culture, but you see, it's still American culture, right? It hasn't gotten rid of and is still trying to bring a good deal of the Civil War back, right? This is exactly what's happening in American politics right as we speak, right? Is that, and we've got to see that kind of thing. Now, the other thing is that when we look at what has to be done today, is that one of the things we've got to deal with is we've got 1 million black men in jail. And we know that all of those folk don't belong there, right? And it's being proved to us every day. And for those in law, they're always having to let somebody out of jail that didn't belong there, but has served 20 years for being there. All right? We know from the drug thing, which is very popular among all of us, right? That
especially here.
It's especially in New York, right?
It was the new school.
No, the new school. I was thinking about New York because that's where the greatest privilege has come in terms of who goes to jail and who doesn't go to jail, right? Where there is really wealth, the more wealth there is, and
talking about the drugs on Wall Street.
That's what I'm talking
I got
about.
you.
Of course, I'm, not anybody here. But you see, it's you until white America is willing to give up privilege and or bring those who haven't got it up to that level, right? That they too have the same, it's supposed to be called justice, all right? All right? Until there's justice, we don't have a chance.
Yeah.
All right? Is that, and so it becomes terribly important. Now, right now, if you ask me, well then, what would you change? See, because let me tell you something. It's in the action. Martin, one of the great things that Martin taught us, it's got to be in the action. It's in the action that we discover who we are. It's only in the action that we find out what our nation is really like. It's only in the action that we discover what can be and what can't be. All right? Is that when we think of it that way, we begin to see that action will free us. Now, all of us must act if we want a free society, really. Because if we don't, we're going to go right down the drain. See, there was a land that used to say, oh, the sun never sets on our soil. And we're so great. Now they're just a little island over there. See what I mean? Is because they didn't really live what they said they were, and they were lying to themselves all the time, and in the process, they went down with their lies. All right? And it becomes true for everyone. I don't care who you are. It's not because they're England that they went down and we can't, right? We will. There's no two ways about it. In fact, we're on our way to what I think that India was once like, rich, although you can tell by all the stuff that's left from thousands of years, right? Right? And now poverty like you wouldn't believe. All right? Now the point being is what kind of nation do we really want? The one we say we are? Huh? Or in fact, face what we really are like, and so face it that we deal with it realistically. We think that we've got great education, but it's American education. It's really not great education. All right? See what I mean? Yeah. See, and we can take each one of these and put America, all of it, you can put it. The American church is a laugh. It has been. It's nothing but a frontier kind of religion. All right? See, and until we change these things, and this is what Martin was starting, is that somebody's got to learn how to act free themselves from the nonsense and the lies. We just have to. That's if we're going to be a society worthy of being a society. All right?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So, I think I think we'll just take a couple of questions out of respect, unless I get instructions otherwise. I think I'm about to get instructions otherwise. No? Yes? Okay, all right. So, well, this is always difficult, but how about if you have a comment, just make your comment, and we will, we may respond, we may not, but if you have a question, make a question, but please don't do both. That being said, we've not talked about the famous blow that shook up the world, and it wasn't Muhammad Ali and Sonny Liston, it was Jim Clark and Dr. Vivian. So I'll leave it to you to decide as a questioner if you want to hear the behind the scenes or the subsequent take on that story. So the floor is open. Okay. Yes.
Stand up. Reverend, could you say something about Fred Shuttlesworth and his involvement with the movement?
I like talking about Fred. Oh, see, ministers, it's that ego. We think anytime we talk, it's heard at the back of the room, But Fred Shuttlesworth was really the most courageous man in the movement. It's too bad we can't hear Fred now, all right? Is that I saw Fred, I didn't see him, television saw him, everything else, but I've seen him do some courageous things, and then I'll tell you a joke that goes with Fred. But because I know 2 or 3 of them, right? Fred, with his family, walked right through a line of white people that were going to keep he and his children out of a segregated, a desegregated school, right? I mean, he walked right through the line, and his family both just, hello, and he was also beaten, and so was his family. But Fred kept coming back. See, Fred had the courage that is truly a free man's courage, right? He was.
You said he was a free black man.
Yes, I'd rather say that. But he really was. You see, and really, it takes more courage to be free and black in America than it did to be any other color. It's even more so, just so you don't think I'm spilling it on, but it's harder being a black man in America than it is to be a light black man in America.
Next question.
We have one here, Khalil.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Vivian, I wanted to ask you this question as far as to find out what it is that we really want as a people. I'm not born in America, but I've learned a few things today. But what I wanted to say is one of the quotes Martin King was saying is that racism is like a white attitude. And we discussed tonight about white privilege. So should we remind our peoples, black peoples here on this land, that this is stolen land, and that it's stolen land every day, and that as much as us being guests on this land, that those in control, they're guests as well. And could we work with those whose land was stolen to find out what it is we want so we can live here together? And that is my question. Should we work with it, and should we expose this as being stolen land, and that we don't owe those who stole the land? Thank you.
See, and this is what I was talking about, is when I said, is that we must all come to realize that we've got to free this land together, all right? Is that, and everybody's going to have to be treated decently in order for it to happen. Is that, I used to do a lot of workshops, and I would say, black people are treated worse than anybody else, but Native Americans are treated worse than anybody else in this society because they have been treated that way for so long. Their land was stolen. But what we have to also consider as we deal with immigrants coming in here, right, is that we stole 5 states of land from Mexico, right? In other words, let's face it, we're not as good as we say we are, but find a way to correct it, right? And if all of us find a way to correct it on behalf of all of us, is that then we can have a chance to truly be the dynamic core of the society. Remember, the world is waiting to be in leadership, right? And we're not. This woman's on.
She's
okay. Oh, pardon
facilitating.
Me.
Oh, sorry. Hi, New School alum Talib Hudson. Question is, how do we as Black people wake up? And the context is that you mentioned about liking being Black and how racial identity is important and how you have to find information. But today it seems like there's so much information available with the internet, but yet it seems that we as Black people don't have that same sense of racial identity or liking ourselves, and in the context of that being a 50-year lull, as you mentioned. So how do we wake up as Black people?
Well, see, the point is, I think everybody is awake. They don't know what to do, all right? See, remember, we wanted to struggle before Martin moved in Montgomery, right? But until we had a strategy for moving, we just didn't move. People are not dumb, and they've got to live every day, right? You've got to have something that works before people really, it's not that they're asleep, they have to have something that works to cause them to come forward. And one of the things that's the problem with nonviolence is that they don't understand. And they say, you know, nobody's going to beat me in the head. Well, but the point is, what they're really saying is, give me another method. But there isn't another method. Why did we take nonviolence? Because we had no other out. All right? Now, the point being is, we found it worked. And we got to keep finding it works by doing it. All right? It will work. India is still has been at it longer than we have, and now they're one of the 3 greatest in the world today. India's on its and they're educating far more people than we are. All right, is that really think about that, right? In fact, we're hiring people from India to do work when we could do it here if we were properly educating, right? We haven't decided to educate the uneducated here, right? I think when I think about, this is the one I would really love to deal with in both ends of it, is that what we're dealing with is that we're 40% dropout, and you call yourself a people. You understand what I'm saying? And you look where that leads is 1 million men in jail. And we're not, and they're doing nothing while they're in jail but dying. And their only protection could be that we begin to educate everyone and not let them out. Well, I don't want to go that far. But that we educate everyone in jail today. Why not? We're feeding, we're clothing, we're sheltering, we're doing everything, but what? But giving them something they can use when they get out, right? Is that and if you drop out within 1.5 years to 2 years, you're in prison, right? Now, what are we going to do? Spend our money, and we spend more money on keeping people in jail than we do on educating them. I mean, it's just nonsense. We're going by a code of yesterdays, all right? That makes it impossible for, we're going by a code of yesterdays that makes it impossible for us to prepare this society for the goodness it could produce and for the truth it could represent.
And these are words spoken by a man who spent time in Mississippi's Parchman prison. It was like hell on earth. So, is this last question? Okay.
Good afternoon. Good night, Dr. Vivian.
Sure.
I just turned 47, and I guess you're 90 or almost 90. It's like, how do you not become weary in spirit? I feel this weariness settling over me, you know, as I try to talk to young people, you know, about what's going on, because they're buying the post-racial debate. I mean, they're buying the post-racial stuff that's being fed to them. You know, I have other people, like you said, they don't like their blackness, so they, you know, they don't want to do anything, you know, because they figure, well, I have what I need. I'm taking care of me and my family, you know, and I'm just getting tired of trying to educate or advocate on our behalf for people that don't want to have their mind open. And I understand it's a psychological thing, you know, because if you know, I understand it. They don't want to understand it. It's kind of like a desperation below the surface, because if they really understood how, you know, the images, the appropriation of their art forms and culture, which I think kind of answers the young man's question about how do we wake up. It's like if you see people appropriating your art and culture and everything that you created and not being recognized for, you know, as well as the institutional and psychological and structural racism that we live under, it's hard for black people psychologically to come to grips with that and be sane and want to be black in this culture. So
the question is, how does he hold it together?
Right, how do you maintain yourself after all of these years? Mm-hmm. And you have to deal with that.
It's easy for me. You know why?
Microphone.
It's easy for me because I've been there before. I did it. Huh? You see, my point being is that do it. And it gets easier and easier. All right? Because you see that there is some change. Start organizing people. Start working with people in any way you want, right? Toward an end, and you'll find that there's numbers of people just like you that want to do things. They don't know where to start, right? Is that leadership is what people are waiting for, but they're waiting for a personality that, for personalities that don't feel defeat. You can understand what I'm saying? Is that if you think that the person you're joining with feels as low as you feel, neither one of you going to get anywhere, right? The point is that there is enough people just by nature who feel as though that, look, is that things will get better, can get better, and if you work at it, it'll come out. If you get a group that begins to think together, all right, so that they can plan for themselves. You see, how do we get out of a problem? Plan yourself out of a problem. Because that's why I said it's in the action finally, right? But you've got to be able to act on something, and a group of you act on something. I mean, I think about the parents, and it's difficult for parents in a society where that so many of us are by ourselves, right? It's not easy, but the point being is the more if we find people in our same circumstance, right, and agree that we're going to do something about it, and especially parents because their kids are at stake, right? And everything you work for comes down to, is that the wife and kids, right? That's what it comes down to, right? Is that, and begin to make certain you organize people. Give them the same sense that something can be done. The other piece is that we got all these guys in jail. They're dying, but we're dying with them. And pretty soon the whole society is going to be overcome by people like that unless we change that, right? See, our society right now is proven it would rather keep people in jail than educate them. Well, that's something that we can't afford to have as a society, period. And we all got to work together to get something done about it, right? Now, what you do about it in your spot can someday become what we're all doing together. See, if something works, people are willing to follow it. But you got to be a witness to something that works. And if you're a witness to something that works, people listen. If you're telling them something like pie in the sky, they say, yeah, you know, it'd be nice if, you know, and then they walk away, all right? Is that it's organization is basic. That's what the whole labor movement was on. But I've talked enough about that one, right? Yeah. So another question.
I think we actually, we're done, I'm sorry. So before we give an official applause, I want to offer one parting thought. It's a simple thought, which is that we spend every year in a conversation and sometimes a debate about what Dr. King would say about today. It's kind of like WWJD, what would Jesus do, right? Except WWKD, what would King do? And it just seems to me that for those who imagine a Dr. King as a Ben Carson or some kind of neoliberal advocate of the politics of personal responsibility, we have here a living witness of the fight, the spirit, the criticism, the critique, the structural analysis of the work that was not completed in 1964. And I am thankful to you for your voice, for your courage, for your moral vision of the people that we can be. So thank you very much, Dr. C.T. Vivian, for being here tonight. I believe there's still a reception at the museum gallery, which is on 5th Avenue, just shy of the intersection of 13th Street. Yes.